Good afternoon. I'm Spencer Hodge.
And I'm Caleb Amar.
We had the Picture of Dorian Gray, and we're the only two people in this group, so it's gonna be a fun discussion. I actually really enjoyed this book. Has a lot of symbolism, a lot of deeper meaning, and to start this off, I kind of want to talk about the background, and especially the author, Oscar Wilde. He says a lot in this book about society in general, and this is sort of his satire of mid-19th century British society, and it's displayed in a lot of different methods and ways, and that was a note card that flew off. And he got a lot of hate for this book when it first came out because, I mean, he insults like almost every social class, a lot of different walks of life in society, and we're gonna start by kind of going into some of those satires and stereotypes that he puts in here.
Yeah, and okay, so for some background information, so let's start off with So basically the Picture of Dorian Gray is basically a man who is admired for his beauty, wealth, and intelligence, and after realizing that one day his beauty might diminish, go away, and he won't be as handsome as he is now. That starts to get to him, and it actually offers his soul to a painting that allows him to stay young forever. But yet, the painting also reflects all the sin and all the bad things and the emotions that he is feeling within. It is also reflecting onto the painting, and ultimately he stabs the painting, which ending killing himself.
Yes, so that is that is pretty much the plot rundown. Now we're going to go into sort of deeper things with each sort of step of Dorian's demise, his sort of path down, and the wind is really bad. But I want to start with sort of going through the characters and highlighting some of the stereotypes that Wilde goes through like almost right away. So you said you had something about the preface?
Yes. So what Wilde said was, let me find it real quick. He says that no artist has any ethical sympathies, which meaning as in Wilde believes that artists really don't care about other races or other ethnicities, thinking that, oh yeah, let me draw this painting, even though it might offend someone or some race, it doesn't really matter because this painting might bring me a lot of wealth, a lot of fame to it, and that's what Wilde is basically saying. And he's also saying about paintings that those who find ugly meanings in beautiful things are corrupt without being being charming. This is a fault, saying that people finding so basically saying if there's a beautiful painting that everybody finds, but that one person finds that one deep, dark meaning into the painting that can have an opposite meaning, he's saying those people are at fault and they really don't have don't really let's say they don't really deserve to live or don't deserve to like criticize other things.
Yeah. So the preface is it's very large. It sort of sets the tone for a lot of different themes that Wilde's going to establish in the future. But another thing that also does this sort of introduction, really good introduction to the themes of this book is its actual first chapter. And in the first chapter, we are introduced to two main characters, Basil Hallard and Lord Henry Wotton. Wilde immediately establishes a contrast where even though these two are friends, they lead very different lives. Basil is a painter, so he's on the more lower middle class sort of spectrum, and he's an alright painter, but he's not like a Da Vinci, or he's never like really gained any fame, like Lord Henry says a lot of painters tried to do. And Lord Henry himself is, in the higher class, given away by the title of Lord. And he has a certain walk of life, a certain moral code or immoral code, where he lives by certain rules. And not all these rules are fantastic, but Lord Henry pretty much lives solely in pursuit of pleasure and beauty. And those are two things that he will eventually influence Dorian Gray in. And you can see how Basil's sort of reaction to Lord Henry's ideology will set up a lot of the conflict that is throughout this book. There is one part that I wanted to sort of talk about, and it's an example of Wilde's Wilde using satire to sort of point out the flaws in a certain part of English society, and as well as introducing a lot about the character of Lord Henry. And this was on chapter 1, page 5, where Lord Henry is talking about the Catholic Church, and he says, look at the successful men in any of the learned professions, how perfectly hideous they are, except, of course, in the church. But then in the church, they don't think. A bishop keeps on saying at the age of 80 what he was told to say when he was a boy of 18. And as a natural consequence, he always looks absolutely delightful. So this is a lot of the criticism of the Catholic Church. And, in the 1800s, throughout the world, we were getting to a more tolerant time where people could more freely express their ideas without that much punishment. We aren't quite there yet. But Wilde got away with this. He did get a lot of hate for a lot of the stereotypes in this book, but he was able to get away with this. And the fact that Lord Henry says this about the Catholic Church shows like the sort of time that they're living in, that the book is set in, as well as the sort of person that Lord Henry is, and how he criticizes pretty much everybody else who is against him, and all the he pretty much decides to keep the company of unintelligent people.
Okay, and I would like to add something on to Basil Hallward. So Basil, whenever he's creating, okay, so let me just say this. Basil, like Spencer mentioned, Basil is an artist, but he's not a famous artist. And I wanted, on page 5, it says, we poor artists have to show ourselves in a society from time to time to remind the public that we are not savages. So that's, I want to point that as a social status or a social point of view, whereas in artists think that they're free, they can express themselves in any way or matter, as in society believes that, oh wait, these are people who just draw things, probably they're not even wealthy, they're in their homes most of their times, or in their studio working all the time. But Lord Henry kind of sees Basil as like a dear friend or an acquaintance, let me say acquaintance, and sees him as, oh yeah, you're not just some savage, you're an actual human who believes in things. But Basil, I want to say that Basil is mostly an insecure person, because he doesn't really want to, I think he believes he doesn't want to sell his paintings, or he doesn't really want to show them out. Most of his paintings are like things that he likes, not what other people like. He believes that, oh wait, this painting is good for my standards. I don't care what you think. I believe that it is good enough.
Yeah, so that kind of also clashes, adds more contrast between the relationship of Basil and Lord Henry, because when Basil says that he does not want to exhibit his painting that he drew of Dorian Gray, Lord Henry is kind of confused. He's like, if this is such a great painting, why wouldn't you want to sort of display it? And Basil says that he put too much of himself in that painting. And Lord Henry doesn't quite comprehend this, but because of the sort of person that he is, and also that's also part of the reason why Basil and Lord Henry are very much like opposite sort of people. But Basil believes that in every work of art is a part of the artist, and he was scared that too much of himself was in Dorian Gray's painting because of all the feelings that he has for Dorian Gray and all the sort of terror that Dorian Gray makes him feel. And this is in chapter 1, we're also sort of introduced to a huge part of the book as a whole, and that is the charm of Dorian Gray. And he's often described as a charming young man, and just that alone wouldn't be really substantial, but there's a specific thing about Dorian Gray that makes people sort of falter and want to comply with him, and it's first introduced in chapter 1 on page 7, where Basil is telling the story of how he met Dorian Gray, and he says this to Lord Henry. He says, "You know yourself, Harry, how independent I am by nature. I've always been my own master, had at least always been so, till I met Dorian Gray. Then, but I don't know how to explain it to you. Something seemed to tell me that I was on the verge of a terrible crisis in my life. I had a strange feeling that fate had in store for me exquisite joys and exquisite sorrows. I grew afraid and turned to quit the room. It was not conscience that made me do so. It was a sort of cowardice. I take no credit to myself for trying to escape." And that's very powerful, because just a glance from Dorian Gray, just seeing him, inspired that kind of fear and terror and joy and ecstasy in Basil. And that is the effect that Dorian Gray has on people, is something that is a huge part of the entire rest of the book. And it shows it's also kind of part of his undoing as well.
Okay, yeah, and I want to talk about something about Dorian Gray. Well, I want to say, I believe which kicks this story plot off is Lord Henry and Dorian Gray. When Lord Henry gives off the speech to Dorian Gray, where it's like, what I said in the beginning, where someone tells Dorian that your beauty is not going to stay there forever, that's where Lord Henry comes in, because when Lord Henry starts explaining all of these things, Dorian is now contradicting himself, saying, what means do I have to do to keep this beauty? And this is where Dorian starts, I guess he starts revealing his true self, as in his true nature, that he's mostly kind of selfish and he's thinking about most of himself, like in his fiancee Sybil, where Dorian, where we're going to talk about how we're going to talk about Sybil, and her life was really, she had a brother who his brother was in, I believe in Australia, or came back for Sybil to take her to on a trip, and him and his mother really didn't get on good terms, but Sybil really honored her mother. And so, not knowing that Sybil was engaged to Dorian believed that, if Sybil is going to be the reason why I'm going to lose my beauty, or that's what he thought, then Dorian broke off the relationship with Sybil, making her saying that if Dorian cannot love me, then I can't be loved by no man, making her kill herself, Dorian's mindset thinking that, oh no, I accidentally killed Sybil because of my selfish acts. And then that's where the whole thing starts taking off, as in Dorian's psychotic rampage.
Yeah, that's completely right. So, as soon, Basil warns Lord Henry. He says, don't go anywhere near Dorian, because Dorian is very easily influenced. And Lord Henry's whole sort of ideology, pursuit of nothing but beauty and youth and luxury, it struck a chord with Dorian, because he got scared when Lord Henry actually finally did meet Dorian. He was scared that his beauty was going to fade, and he would eventually even die, and his life would be terrible. So Dorian wanted to do anything that he could to prevent that from happening, and that's where sort of his whole lifestyle mimicking Lord Henry sort of began. And he does fall in love with Sybil. He did really love her, which is a really big part of Dorian Gray's character and sort of his progression, when after she loves him so much that she can't act anymore. that also shows a part of Dorian's charm and his sort of allure that he has that just sort of draws people in. And when she tells him that she can't act anymore, he breaks off the relationship because, like Caleb said, he was afraid that she was going to contribute to his loss of beauty, like he didn't want, and he broke it off. And he realized his sort of wrong soon after, but by the time that he wanted to apologize, it was too late. She had already killed herself. And that's the point where Dorian really starts to kind of spiral down. And that's also the point where the whole plot really does start, like Caleb said, because that is the first act that Dorian Gray ever does that's projected on the painting. So he makes a deal with the painting. Well, he sort of pledges his soul to the painting that Basil drew of him, and he's sort of binded to it. So every bad act and every day when he ages, instead of happening on his physical body, it happens to the painting. And by the end, the painting is really old and sullied and disgusting and horrible. And that's really, when Sybil commits suicide because of Dorian, that's really the first time where we get to see the painting kind of starting to be tainted.
And as I mentioned earlier, that Sybil did had a older brother. So after her older brother realized that, wow, you're the reason why my sister killed herself, and that's why she's dead. He only really hovered around Dorian. He really didn't try to do acts of crime towards him. But Dorian, because of realizing that, oh no, he could probably kill me at any moment, all the guilt and anxiety started building up on him. But coincidentally, he was assassinated by some random person during the party. So at that point, Dorian is kind of relieved, but that guilt and anxiety is still upon him.
Yeah, so Dorian feels really guilty about Sybil. That's also part of the reason why it was projected onto the painting, because he wanted to get rid of his guilt. But James Vane was a living reminder of his guilt, pretty much. A reminder that he killed his sister, although albeit unintentionally. She's still dead because of him. And James Vane, just the sight of James Vane kind of comes to haunt Dorian. Even like years and years in the future, he still sort of stalks Dorian and haunts him for his sister's death. And when James is accidentally killed, Dorian's relieved. And this is after like years and years of living the lifestyle that Lord Henry lived, and being projected on all of his sins being projected onto the painting, and he's relieved. And that shows the real progression of Dorian's character from the sort of innocent, young, charming boy that we met at the very beginning, that Basil described at the very beginning, to the sort of monster that he is by the end of the book. And speaking of Basil,
yeah. So apparently Basil heard of all of the things that Dorian is doing, and Basil is pretty upset at Dorian. So Basil goes and confronts Dorian, and Dorian, surprisingly, is not happy with Basil's opinion. So after Dorian left the room, it came back. He decided to kill Basil and stabbed him with a knife, and that knife is really significant because that is the weapon that Dorian used to practically almost kill himself.
Yeah, and that's still a very big matter of controversy. So Basil heard that Dorian Gray, there's terrible things about Dorian Gray, scandals and lies and all sorts of bad stuff. We never really know specifically what Dorian's been doing, but it can't be good because by the end the painting is really looking rough. But Basil decides to confront him, and as a friend and as a sort of admirer of Dorian Gray, he wants to sort of get him back on the right path, not the path that Lord Henry sort of made for him. And he kind of annoys Dorian and in a fit of rage just stabs him and kills him just like that. That's another indicator that how far Dorian's gone, because Basil was arguably his best friend.
Yes.
And the loss of Basil also takes a really big toll on Dorian and the painting. And now, at this point, Dorian is really old, even though you can't see that because his aging was projected on the painting. And he's very guilty. He feels very guilty about all the sins that he's committed in his life. So he's decided that he's sort of had enough of the painting. So he goes up to his room, takes out the knife that he used to kill Basil, and stabs the painting. Now, what happens here is, later his servants come into the room and they find an old, shriveled up, tainted body of Dorian Gray, dead. And the painting looks as it did when Basil first painted it. And this is sort of an ending. This is a really heavy ending, because the painting was who Dorian really is, the person who Dorian really was. So when Dorian stabbed the painting, he was really killing himself. And the body that he was wearing was really the painting, not himself. It was just his ideal self, his projection of everything that he wanted to be and everything that he was scared of losing. And when he stabbed the painting, all that, the roles kind of switch back to how they were in the beginning of the story, and Dorian is dead. So now the question is, did Dorian know he was killing himself? Because that's a big matter of controversy. He had enough of the painting. He took Basil's advice. Basil wanted him to kill the painting before, Dorian killed Basil. Yeah. But he finally listens. So the real question is Dorian really had enough? And does he know he's killing himself, however, unknowingly or...
Well,
yeah.
So whenever I heard Spencer's question, I was thinking to myself that, one, I feel like Dorian knew that he sold his soul to the painting, but yet whenever he was about to go stab the painting, I guess whenever you're in that state of mind that, you have to do this, you block out every sense of like correctness, like you don't think of what's the consequence of it, like what will happen with the painting. I feel like unconsciously he just stabbed the painting, thinking that, probably either one, I can lay to rest, and B, I will be guilty free, or it was just a means of him trying to get rid of the painting so it won't reflect of any more of his deeds. And I believe that he just wanted to get rid of the painting just so whenever he walks up to that room, the painting, he won't see something that reflects almost his whole life.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Like, I guess to Dorian, who sold his soul to the painting, that painting is his actual self. All the sins he committed, his actual look, his aging, it's all in that painting. So when he looks at that painting and he sees an old, shriveled up, tainted, terrible person, it's almost like he's being mocked by himself. And I guess he did sort of have enough, and he finally decided that the painting needs to go. And the consequence of that was, unfortunately, Dorian's own death. But overall, this book is really heavy. Like, there's a lot of death, a lot of mature themes, a lot to say about humanity in general, and human nature, and the pursuit of living only for pleasure and glory and luxury.
And I felt like Lord Henry kind of almost represents all of that, because, as you know, like as a lord, he has this kind of social quote to have, like what other lords would have, like probably a big plot of land, like all these nice furniture and everything. And he's that type. I feel like he digs deep. Lord Henry, he digs deep into what others say. Like I remember in the first chapter where he thinks to himself, like, wow, Basil really loved this painting. Like, he actually analyzes Basil against all of his paintings with Dorian, the Dorian Gray painting, and he looks at it as in, wow, Basil is actually someone who can smile, someone who can actually like things. So I feel like Lord Henry, even though he's more like with pleasure and everything, he also has that humanity side of him, as thinking like, uh, okay, yeah, he gave that advice to Dorian, he gave that advice to Basil, but still things didn't end up the way that Lord Henry warned them.
Yeah, like sort of. I do kind of see that humanity underneath Lord Henry. And I even see the humanity underneath Dorian Gray, especially with like all the conflicts that he has to face throughout this book, and just all the things that happen to him. And yeah, I definitely kind of see that. Even I think the kind of point of that is that no matter how terrible and how vicious and how horrible a person may seem, there's still some humanity under there. There's still some aspect of being a person. And underneath that, even if our desires are to, pursue glory and luxury and vanity and all of that stuff, we're still humans. And there's still that sort of underlying factor of human nature that sort of influences our ideas and even some of our actions overall.
I think that's it.
So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this discussion of Dorian Gray. It was a very good book. I personally enjoyed it quite a lot.
It was interesting. Yeah, when we first researched the book and I was looking at the plot overview, I actually like how it was all about, even though it's only about just one person, it had so much meaning and so much detail of what this book and what more details it was. So I believe this book was pretty interesting, and I like this book very much.
Yeah, Oscar Wilde's sort of whole thing is like he develops. You're right. The whole entire book is about Dorian Gray. He's the central character. He's the subject of the picture of Dorian Gray. But I do also agree with you how Wilde sort of paints this whole industrial world around you, and emphasizes a lot of characters and their sort of underlying motivations and how they would act, and his satire and symbolism. Like honestly, reading this book, like if you weren't paying attention on one sentence, like you can miss like something huge.
Yeah.
Like there's so many subtle references and jokes and symbolism packed into this book. It's really crazy how it was even published in the first place. So yeah, I think that's about it. Thanks for watching, and hope we get a good grade.
All right.